And now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Terry Cook. Terry is the lead of the LASP Office of Communications and Management. Terry?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming on this extremely auspicious date, May the 4th, which every Star Wars fan in the audience will recognize. That will probably be evident to you in some of our backgrounds and clothing that you'll see here tonight. But the main reason we're here is to learn more about our lab's involvement in NASA's IXPE mission, the Imaging X-ray Polarimetry Explorer mission. And then also about the unique program that LASP has that certifies CU Boulder undergraduates to participate in flight operations for all the different levels of NASA spacecraft. So without further ado, I want to introduce Darren Osborne, who will be speaking first, and then the rest of the panel as well. Darren is the flight director for IXPE. And after graduating from CU Boulder with a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering, he's been with LASP working as a flight controller and flight director for the past 22 years. He is, of course, a bus fan and enjoys skiing, climbing, traveling, and spending time with his family outside of work. Casey Davis is a flight controller too for IXPE. She graduated from CU Boulder with a bachelor's degree in astronomy and also holds several other degrees, including a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Drawing, a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Photography, a Master of Fine Arts in Studio Art as well. And she's been working at LASP for 1 year. Luca Bonoriga just completed his junior year at CU Boulder studying aerospace engineering with a minor in atmospheric and oceanic science. He's worked as a command controller at LASP for the last 2 years and is the student planning lead and the student instrument lead for the IXPE mission. Lee Reedy is a flight controller on IXPE who's been with LASP for 9 years and has 35 years of experience in space operations. His breadth and depth of experience allow him to support our on-orbit programs and a variety of roles from mission planner to flight director. Stephanie Ruswick earned a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering from the University of Michigan. And after working as an engineer at Northrop Grumman for 8 years, she brought her experience to LASP, where she works now as a flight controller on IXPE and has also worked on Source and AIM missions. Alison Rodenbau is the operations software planning and scheduling lead for IXPE, and she holds a bachelor's in computer science and a master's in engineering management from CU Boulder. She's worked for LASP for 5 years, 3 of those as a student employee, and now focuses on customizing our lab's in-house software to meet IXPE's planning and scheduling needs. And last but not least is Annika Termala. And Annika is the student lead for IXPE mission operations. She's been working at LASP for the past 2 years while pursuing a bachelor's in computer science at CU Boulder, as well as a minor in creative technology design. And she loves also to create art in her free time. So Darren, you can take it away.
All right, sounds good. Let me bring up the presentation here.
Great, we can see it.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for attending. Terry gave us a really good introduction there, so we'll just go ahead and jump right in. So what is IXPE and what does it study? So when I tell people out and about what IXPE studies, I basically say it studies black holes, but that's not the only thing it studies. It studies nebula and neutron stars and a number of other things. And the really unique thing about it is the way that it studies these. It's in the name, it's studying the polarization of X-rays coming from these various different sources. One of the fun things to note about this mission is it is a SMEX mission. That's NASA's Small Explorer mission. And so that means that the budget is generally less than $200 million to qualify for that SMEX category. And for us, that means our mission was $188 million, and the launch cost was $50.3 million of that total cost. So how does IXPE do its thing? So I'm going to see if I can draw here just a little bit. So this is a artist's representation of the IXPE spacecraft in its deployed configuration. And I'll talk a little bit later about how when we launched, how we were not deployed. But this is how we are in our science mode. So if you can imagine, the telescope, the mirrors of the telescope are up here on the end of the boom. The spacecraft bus is down here at the bottom with the solar panels. We've got a GPS receiver and our antennas down here, and there's another one down at the other end on the other side. This backside here is actually a radiator for heat. And then things that you can't see that are on the top here of the bus are a lot of various different components, including the telescopes themselves. So an X-ray will come in through this mirror module assembly right here and travel down alongside the boom and into the telescope itself. So you may ask, well, why isn't this all enclosed? And with X-rays, you don't really need that. And so you don't need the extra weight to have an enclosure here. Secondly, these mirror module assemblies have 24 different mirrors in them, in each one. There's 3 different telescopes, and they are about 1/2 meter long. And the reason for that is that, as anybody that's been to the doctor knows, that if you go to the doctor, you get X-rayed, and the X-rays go through things, including your body. So getting an X-ray to bend so that you can get that X-ray photon to go into the telescope the way that you want it to is somewhat difficult. So these are very shallow bends that are occurring to the X-ray, and then it comes down into the telescope down here on the bottom. And we'll move on. Maybe we'll move on. One second. Technical difficulties here. So early results from IXPE. So these are 2 images that were published on Valentine's Day, actually. The image on the left, on the top left, they're both from Cassiopeia A. The one on the left is a composite with the Chandra telescope. Everything that you see in blue is from Chandra, and everything you see in purple is from IXPE. And then down on the bottom right is another false color image. So you can kind of see how the intensity of the X-rays and see what IXPE is picking up there. Some fun statistics. So on the right-hand side, you'll see a picture of the launch itself right as we were taking off. We did launch on a Falcon 9, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a bit. The launch date was December 9th at 0600 UTC. So that was 1 a.m. Eastern time. So for us in the Mountain Time Zone, that was 11 p.m. on December 8th. So that was a long evening for us. Our final orbit is just over 600 kilometers in height at the apogee, and just under that at perigee. And the really unique thing about it, our orbit, is that our inclination is less than 0, or it's just over 0 degrees. So it's 2.3 degrees, which is really, really small. And that presents its own challenges. Our downlink rate is 2 megabits per second. Our downlink time per contact is roughly about 11 minutes. And we only have 2 ground stations that we can use, and that's because of our orbit. There's just not a lot of ground stations that are around the equator for us to use. So our main ground station is actually in Malindi, Kenya, and it's provided by the Italian Space Agency. And I'll talk a little bit later about how this mission is really an international collaboration. Our second ground station is in Singapore, and that is operated by the folks at KSAT out of Norway, actually. And our average number of contacts per day since we've launched has been 9 contacts per day. Sometimes we'll have more, sometimes less, but that's what our average is right now. Okay, so I'm going to play a movie here of the launch, and I'm going to be skipping around a little bit, so bear with me. But I wanted to show everyone some fun parts of the launch, and I'll be describing what we are seeing in that as we go along. So at the beginning here, of course, we've got our countdown. So I'll go ahead and let it play. Obviously, it's a very dark launch because it was 1 a.m. Eastern time. So we're counting down here. This was on SpaceX on a Falcon 9. We were the only payload, even though we are a very small spacecraft. And I'll explain why we were the only payload in just a little bit. So there we go. We have a very beautiful launch. It launched right on time, right when we were supposed to launch. One of the big things that we worked on right prior to launch was figuring out how do we handle if the launch has to be delayed by a minute, 10 minutes, an hour. Our launch window was an hour and a half long. So I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead here. Bear with me just a moment. So coming up here, the view that you have right now is looking from the second stage down into the first stage. And what we're going to see is we're going to see the second stage deployment. So on your right-hand side, there's the second stage. You can see the camera there. And from the first stage, you can see into the second stage as it takes off and goes away. So coming up in just a little bit, we're going to have the fairing, and you can see how hot this stage rocket really gets. On the left-hand side, because we were on a SpaceX, the first stage, of course, returns to Earth. I won't show that, but you can go see the video. It was a perfect landing of that first stage. Another fun thing was this first stage had, it was the most times that a first stage had launched, and it had also taken astronauts to the ISS. So coming up here in just a little bit, and you can kind of see it down here on the bottom, we'll see the fairing separation. So there's IXPE here on the left-hand side in its stowed configuration. And so we were stowed because that long boom that I showed earlier, if you launch with something like that, it can wobble an awful lot, and we didn't want that to happen. So we were all stowed up. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the orbit. And it's very convenient that SpaceX gave us a nice, fun little graphic to show the orbit here. So in this orbit, this is the launch orbit here, this kind of gray line going into the blue. So the gray is where it was, and the blue is where it would be going. You can see here that this is where we are in our stage 2. And then all of a sudden, when we get down here to the equator, we're going to take a hard left and turn. And so what you're going to see here is the second stage has already made the maneuver to the right attitude. And then it's going to go ahead and fire up its engine for a second time. It'll put us into the right orbit as well as circularize the orbit. So makes it so that we won't have a really low perigee and then eventually burn in. And then the last thing I wanted to show here, and this was really fun for us in the mock. For those of you that were in the mock, it was kind of a tense moment. One of the things we were very concerned about at launch, for any launch, is deploying your solar arrays. So what we got to see here with SpaceX, because SpaceX has a camera everywhere, is we get to see IXPE deploy. And there's that radiator that I was talking about earlier. And the solar arrays are all buttoned up around and tight to the spacecraft itself. There goes the first set of solar array panel deployments. And everyone in the mock started cheering at that point. And there was much celebration. And then we got a little bit nervous because we kind of all forgot that there's a long time between the first solar array deployment and the second solar array deployment, to the point that there's about 90 seconds between the two. So you can imagine that we're all in the mock. One of the things that we were really concerned about is the solar array deployments. And by and large, we'd forgotten that the solar array deployment just takes a long time. The reason for that is to make sure that these first panels, once they deploy, they finish doing their little jitters so that we don't get additional issues with the spacecraft. So we're all watching this, we're all very nervous, and we're saying, please hold on, we want to see that second deployment. Please, we want to see the second deployment. And then all of a sudden, we'll get that second deployment. And there it goes. And you can just kind of see it, and you can see how it kind of flops back and forth there. So that was a really exciting time for us. Okay, now I got to see it. There we go. So where does LASP fit in on all of this? So first of all, here's some pictures from just after launch. This is, we've had that second solar array deployment. And we're coming up on our first Malindi contact. Very excited for what's going to happen on the left. And then on the right-hand side here is after we had deployed that boom, this is the telemetry that we had during that boom deployment. You can see there's a bunch of different squiggly lines. And the fact that there were squiggly lines and then they went back to not squiggly is what we were looking for. And that meant that the boom deployed successfully. So LASP is the center of the universe when it comes to IXPE for mission operations. So everything flows into us or out from us. So we've got our two ground stations here. We are connected to the ground stations via a NASA cloud, basically. One path that goes to Malindi goes through the Johnson Space Flight Center, out through the Aussie Gateway in Fucino, Italy, and then on to Malindi. The other path goes to directly to Singapore. And then we've got a number of other things that come into us. All of these dotted lines were all used during launch in the early few days, sort of the first 7 to 10 days of launch. And then we've dropped those since because we don't need them anymore. So we get all of the data in, we send all the commands to the spacecraft. Then we do data processing and we send the data to the Science Operations Center, which is located in Marshall. The PI is located at Marshall as well. And then the SOC sends the data onto the HESARC, which is the High Energy Research Center for basically for X-rays. Ball Aerospace is the company that built the bus and integrated the instrument. And LASP is actually a subcontract to Ball Aerospace for this mission to do mission operations. So Ball Aerospace supports us significantly as well. So if you want to talk about how the money flows, it flows from Marshall Space Flight Center to Ball and then to us. So what do we do in mission operations? So the picture on the right is our facility at LASP. It's a nice, pretty picture. We are located in the second floor of this building here on the left-hand side. So we provide all the launch, commissioning, nominal operations, contingency operations. So we are in charge of the spacecraft. We do the telemetry data processing and archiving and all the accounting. We do first order engineering data analysis. And then if there's something that we can't figure out what's going on or we need additional help, then of course we go back to Ball, who have the subsystem engineers and expertise there. One of the big things that we do is planning and scheduling. And we've got, Ali is here and she's our lead planning and scheduling developer. So I'll talk about that in just a bit. And then of course we send the data to the SOC. So since this is a Zoom session and we can't all be at LASP and we can't kind of show you around, I figured I'd give you some cartoon drawings of the facility itself. So, oops. So we are the Mission Operations Center. The pictures that you saw earlier are located in this part of the building on the second floor, as I said. We have a little room off to the side that has no windows so that we can put the planners in that room and close the door and they can just do heads down and just do work. We have the engineering operations room that's just down the hall here. This is where all of the Ball engineers sat. And then we have some various other facilities, of course. A little bit more detailed drawing of the MOR. So this is where the flight director sits. Then we had our flight controller, our command controller, our student assistant. At launch, we had a student assistant, ground controller, a planner, and then the mission operations manager. This is the person from Ball that supports us. So one of the things is the only machine that can send commands to the spacecraft is this machine here, the command controller. The command controller is a student from the University of Colorado. So they are the ones that are actually sending the commands. And then just a cartoon drawing of the EOR. So there was space for the mom if they wanted to sit back there, the flight ops engineer, and then the various different subsystems around this area here. I saw that Amy Walden was one of the people that is listening in on this talk. She is the program manager for IXPE out at Marshall, and she was here around launch and for commissioning, and so she was sitting back here in this area here. Again, all of these facilities are restricted access, and you have to have gone through the proper channels to be able to get access to these rooms. So just a little bit about some of the tools that we use. So this is a screenshot of one of the panels for our Oasis CC software. This is what we use for real-time command and control. And you can just see that there's a bunch of telemetry points. I actually took the screenshot, I think on Tuesday. So we've got various different dials to show us, you know, what certain levels are. We've got all sorts of different different telemetry points. Anything that's green is good. This particular one that's red, normally I would say red is bad, but in this case it's okay because this is idle. We're not actually running a procedure at this point, so that's okay. So I talked about the planning and scheduling, and that's one of the really big things that we have to do on this mission. This is what we do is we load 1 week's worth of commands to the spacecraft every week. And this is a screenshot of the GUI interface that we have called Oasis PS. So this is planning and scheduling. That is, then you can see how many different activities are going on. So this second line here shows all of the different things, and you can see how they overlap because you just can't fit them all in this time range. How many different things we have going on. We have various different slews to go from one target to another. So that's what this line is for. And you can see that in this case, we had 4 different slews. And then of course we have obstructions. So because we're in orbit around the equator, if we're looking at a target that is in the ecliptic plane, for some portion of the orbit, the Earth is going to be in the way. And so, of course, the Earth is one of those things that we have to worry about. We also have to worry about what's called the South Atlantic Anomaly. This is an area where high energy particles come in along the magnetic field lines of the Earth and can disrupt or increase the amount of counts that we're getting in the instruments. So we have to ramp down that. So we have to know where we are in the orbit to ramp down our high voltage so that we're not getting those spurious counts. And then of course we have to know when we have contacts with the ground station. So we have this line here for contacts. So you can see that it's a pretty complicated thing that we've got going on. Now this next video here that I'm going to show was put together by Luca, one of our students. And what it's showing is this cyan colored disc here is the view from one of our antennas. The orangish color is a view from the other one that's on the other side of the spacecraft. And the green is, you can think of that as our bore sight. So that's looking straight ahead. The dark blue and the red are the where Singapore in red and Malindi in the blue can see us. And what I want to point out here is because of when we are pointing at a target, there are times where the antennas, and I'll pause this video in just a second right there. So you can imagine if there's a ground station right below us, this there's an antenna pointing this direction and an antenna pointing the other direction, and neither one of those can see the ground station. And that's what we call a null. And just in this last week, we have finished doing the commanding set to avoid downlinking our recorded data during these nulls. And that means basically we don't have to come back and retransmit that data as we're going throughout our orbit. So I'm just going to let this play. And you can kind of see as we're going over the various different ground stations, how that might play out. There's also the SAA there in the yellow outline that we have to avoid. So that just kind of gives you an idea of some of the challenges that we have on this mission. So again, I talked earlier about how this is an international collaboration, and it really is. So Marshall Space Flight Center, again, that's where the PI is. The project management is there. The mirror module assembly was built there, and a lot of testing for the detectors was done there as well. We have OSSI, so the Italian Space Agency is, of course, a big part of it. Ball Aerospace, they've built the payload and done all the integration. And then we've got a number of other various different scientific universities from around the world that provided various different parts and are also scientific collaborators. And of course, there's LASP here. A little bit about our organization. So we have, this is maybe a little bit boring here, but I promise there's a reason for it. So we have our program management at LASP. That person kind of handles the contract side of things and the business side of things. And then I report to that person. I'm the flight director. And then all of these people report to me. We've got a planning lead, the flight controllers, software lead, system architects, software developers, various different planners. And you can see here, I've got the command controllers highlighted. And I promise there's a reason for that. So our command controllers are a really integral part of what we do, not only on IXPE, but in mission operations at LASP. So it's a really unique program that we have at LASP. We hire usually around 10 students in the spring of every year, and we bring them in right after the spring semester has ended. In fact, our next class will begin next Wednesday, a week from today. We bring them in and they get trained up, and then they work for a minimum of 2 years. We ask for a 2-year commitment, operating spacecraft for us. So during the school year, it's 20 hours per week. And then during the summer, it's 40 hours per week. So just a regular job. It is an internship, but it is a paid internship. And we train them in all aspects of flight operations, from system development, flight dynamics, command and control, planning, scheduling, the whole breadth of flight operations. We typically hire them after their sophomore year, again, so we can get those 2 years out of them. And we have had command controllers from all different majors. My favorite one to talk about is that we had a film major at one point, and she was very successful. So the training program that we have, they come in and they work, they are in training for 250 hours of classroom instruction. And then we have practical and hands-on training in addition to that, various different quizzes, projects, written exams, all of this that they have to go through in order to get certified to be considered to be a command controller. So again, we train them on flight operations, various different software applications. And we have to train everybody up on this because it turns out that high schools are not training anybody to fly spacecraft. I don't know why, but they're not. So the final certification, they go through a written exam, a practical examination, and that's where they sit down with the trainer and maybe a flight director or a flight controller. And the professionals will pepper them with questions and ask them, how do you do this thing? And then they have to go be able to answer that question. And they also go through a national access agency check, again, because we're working on NASA missions, and so they have to have the proper background check for that. So here's a picture of last year's total students, all of them, not only just the new ones, but the ones that had gone through the program in previous years. And with that, I'm done. I might have gone a little bit fast, but it looks like we have at least a couple of questions. So Terry, I'll hand it back to you, I guess.
Sounds great. Thanks so much. So we have a question in the chat already, but before we get there, please, everyone, continue to put your
Terry,
questions.
if you're talking, I can't hear you. I don't know if anybody else can. Oh, you know what? There we go. I
Can you hear
muted
me
myself.
now?
Yeah, I muted myself. That's my
Okay,
fault.
perfect.
Sorry.
There has to be at least one thing that happens on Zoom per session, right?
Right.
Great. So everyone, please continue to put your questions in the Q&A. We'll get to those in just a second. But first, I was hoping that each of the panelists could introduce themselves, briefly explain your role for IXPE, and then tell us what's been the most memorable moment so far of the mission for you.
That sounds awesome. You know what? I'll take that. I'll start with that, and then I'll hand it off from there. So actually, I'm going to stop sharing because that way I can see everybody. That's better. What's my most memorable moment? What do I do? Obviously, I'm the flight director, so that is pretty straightforward. My most memorable moment on IXPE, I think, and Terry will remember this moment because she was right outside the mock when that happened. So far, my most memorable moment was the very first time that we got data from the spacecraft, right at that first Malindi contact, right after we tipped off of the vehicle. We were in the contact, and it was super exciting, and I turned around and gave Terry a thumbs up. And so from my standpoint, that was probably, that was years and years of work that was leading up to that moment, and it worked, and everything went the way it was supposed to. So that was super exciting for me.
Even
I'm
behind
just going to go
mask.
around the,
yeah, I was gonna say, even behind your mask, Darren, I could
even
see
behind
the
the
smiles
mask.
coming through.
Right. Yeah. I'm just going to go around on my screen here. So Casey, what do you do, and what's your memorable moment?
Hello, I am an IXPE flight controller / planner. Most memorable moment is absolutely the little solar array doink moment at launch. Like that made launch feel real and made IXPE feel like it's real and it's actually in space, and like this is actually happening. It didn't blow up on the launch pad, so that's most memorable moment for me so far.
Awesome. Luca.
Hi, I'm Luca. Once again, I'm an undergrad student in aerospace engineering at CU Boulder. And I am the IXPE student planner lead. And my most memorable moment, I'm also going to go with launch. Being in the mock during launch was just an absolute honor. Honestly, I was like just stunned to watch a launch from Mission Operations Center.
Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. So I am a planner and flight controller. And I guess we've kind of gone over what those people do already. My most memorable moment, I think it would have to be during launch. Once again, launch is very exciting. The boom deployment, because that's always very scary. So, and it works.
Yeah, I'll agree. That was very scary.
Yeah. So it's good news when it fully deployed and everything looked good.
Allie.
Hi, I'm Allie, and I work on the planning and scheduling software. And for me, the most memorable moment is launch, because a lot of software people don't really get to work real-time operations. So that was cool to kind of be involved in that process and get to see it firsthand.
Awesome. Lee?
I'm a flight controller for IXPE, and I was on the launch itself, so I didn't actually get to see the solar array deployments because I was focused on my console.
As you should be. As you
right.
should be.
Yeah, exactly. However, I did design a lot of the panels that we use and a lot of the plots and stuff. And so I was watching those, and it was really satisfying to have that information displayed the way I expected to see it, and know that everything else was going off without a hitch. The communications was probably the back and forth between the flight controllers and the command controllers, and then also with the ground network and the mom was probably the best part of it for me.
And Annika.
Hi, I'm Annika. I'm an undergraduate in computer science, and I am the student lead for IXPE. I think my most memorable moment was actually during mission rehearsals. So we have rehearsals for launch, we pretend we're launching, we pretend we're running contacts and stuff to make sure that when we actually do it, everything goes really smoothly. And I think we ran into what we thought might be an anomaly set up by the EOR to like fake us out and make us like react to it. I remember sitting there going like, is this an anomaly? Like, what's going on? Like,
So what was the outcome of that? Do you remember?
I don't actually recall. Like memory, it's all memories are like the feeling, and I just remember being like excited and scared, making sure that like I, as the CC on console, was being attentive, looking at the counts, the telemetry, things like that.
Great.
Awesome.
Let me switch to some questions from the audience because they're coming in. And the first one is about the South Atlantic anomaly. And so when you say, said Darren before, avoiding that anomaly, do you end up turning off the non-essential systems while you're orbiting through it, or do you just avoid flying through it altogether?
Yeah, so normally I would hand this to someone else, but I think I'll go ahead and take this one. So for the SAA, because this mission is a low Earth orbiting mission, one of the big drivers for the reason why the orbit is at 0 degrees is to avoid as much of the South Atlantic anomaly as we can. So that was purposeful at the very beginning from the design of the mission. And then what we do is we still cross it because the SAA does go above the equator. So what we do is we send one command at the very beginning of the SAA and then one at the end, which conveniently enough are called SAA mode. And we go into SAA mode, and what that does is it ramps down very rapidly the high voltage in the instrument itself. So these instruments have high voltage to be able to detect the X-rays and build up the counts that they need. So we just ramp that down just on the instrument. The rest of the spacecraft continues to operate just as it normally would. We ramp that down on the instrument and then get through the SAA and ramp it back up. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks so much. And then is the OASIS software that LASP uses the same that began during the SNE era?
Yep, it has been updated quite a bit, but yes, it's got the same core. And the person that originally wrote that that data or that software way back in the day retired a few years ago, but we are still in contact with that person. And we can still come and sort of call them up and say help if we really need it.
Great. And then maybe the students here could answer this one. There's a question from someone who's going to be transferring to CU Boulder in the fall and was hoping that there might be some differences out there for students who have prior experience working with satellites. Any such luck?
Could you possibly repeat that? I couldn't hear you.
Sure. So is there any kind of preference given for someone who transfers in and already has experience working with satellites?
Personally, I don't think that there's any preference given. As Darren said, there are a variety of different majors who are, command controllers at LASP. And so when I came into LASP, I didn't have any prior experience working with satellites. I did all my training on the job. So I think really anyone could do it.
One thing I would say though, is that if you are transferring in and have prior satellite experience, you still need to make sure that you can devote those 2 years of your undergraduate to working at LASP.
Great. And have you all at least participated, it sounds like, for 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 years, and that's preferable, right?
Both of us
Great.
came in and trained together 2 years ago. Yeah.
We have CCs who have been here for 3 and 4 years. And then we also have graduate level CCs who were undergrads. And then they continued on to grad school and kept their job as a command controller.
That's great.
Yeah, I'll jump in just a little bit for that person that is transferring in. Especially if you are considering going to grad school here at CU, I would say it doesn't hurt to apply, because if you come in, let's say you're a junior now and you're going to be a senior next year and you're coming in. But if you're going to be in grad school for a couple of years, that can still count as those 2 years that we're looking for, that 2-year commitment. So it's not unheard of. I would say it's rare that we do that, but it's not unheard of.
Here's a slightly more technical question. What's the upper limit of the X-rays energy that the spacecraft can focus, and what you?
No, I knew someone was going to ask that. I honestly, I could go and look at the documentation, but I don't know that off the top of my head. I apologize. But I will say that I believe the IXPE website, the NASA IXPE website, as well as Wikipedia, I think can probably answer both of those questions.
Great. And another question I had is just, what did you all do for training? You mentioned, Darren, that there's a lot of training. I know that you had overnight rehearsals, but can you give people a sense of how many hours are involved for actually doing this?
I'm going to ask Stephanie and Casey to answer that question, since they were highly involved with that.
So I guess the amount of hours at least involved, so we had 3 rehearsals. Each rehearsal were the first ones weren't that bad, but they were still like, you're working possibly over 40 hours a week for those rehearsals. And then the rehearsal just prior to launch, that one, it feels like gobbledygook in my head now. It's so long ago.
They all blend together.
Yeah, they do.
The one prior to launch was a dress rehearsal, so that was overnight.
Okay, yeah, that was the really intense one. Well, I had the easy job. I had a day shift, so I wasn't working overnight. But I guess my inability to recall how many hours they were should speak to how many hours we were actually pouring into like practicing and just, I don't know, we feigned launch and like this, we're really flying IXPE. So we take it very seriously and put a lot of hours into it. So.
Stephanie, do you have anything else you want to add, or anyone else?
No, it was a lot of work. We put a lot of effort, not only in the rehearsals, but then we had like mini rehearsals. We're going to practice the specific one thing. If there's a launch slip, how do we do that? And that's like one day, just to select a few people, and then all the documentation we put together, the man procs. It was a lot.
Lest it seem a little bit overwhelming, rehearsals and launches and everything are very special events and require an awful lot of preparation as well as time initially for the commissioning part of it. But the amount of hours that you put in is pretty well regulated and distributed as well as we can in order to keep people from, getting burned out too much. Everybody here is really good about filling in for other folks when you have an appointment or something. And so it's a very enjoyable kind of work environment.
And say, I remember we had all of the CCs, all the command controllers had time on console to practice during rehearsals. And so with like all 20 of us doing it for multiple hours, that's a good indication of how much time was spent doing those trainings.
Yeah, I think we all the command controllers and flight controllers had to have a minimum of 10 hours on console. And most everyone got well more than that.
So a question here about what would happen if a ground station became unavailable? Would the tracking and data relay satellite system be a viable option?
So that's a really good question. I'll field this one again. And you can see some of the flight controllers have kind of sheepish grins on their faces right now. Just due to the way the design of the spacecraft, we cannot command via TDRS to the spacecraft. So the only way to be able to have a TDRS contact is to have a command already on board for that TDRS contact. So unfortunately, it doesn't do us a lot of good to be able to use TDRS in the event of losing commands on board because we can't command through it. So we really just have to rely on the Malindi and the Singapore ground stations for it.
And where do you get the ephemerides for the IXPE ground station passes? Is that through SpaceTrack? And maybe you can just explain what that is for the audience.
I'm going to actually let Luca do that.
Yeah, so we use SDK, which is Systems Toolkit, which is a software that's used for orbit propagation and stuff like that. And we use that for planning. And SDK pulls directly from SpaceTrack, which is a website. And I'm not sure off the top of my head who runs SpaceTrack, but it does receive telemetry directly from the spacecraft. So we get attitude and ephemeris from SpaceTrack, and we use that in planning every week.
Yeah, just a little correction. It receives the tracking from various different ground stations around the world.
And what else does LASP operate? And are any of you involved in any other missions or instruments right now?
Lee, you want to take that one?
Yeah, so we actually have several different satellite programs that we operate. I am also a AIM FD and flight controller. I was the Kepler FD. AIM stands for Aeronomy of Ice in the Mesosphere. It's also a low Earth orbiting vehicle that's been around since 2007, I think it is. So they tend to last a very long time. The roles that we play in LASP is we can do the Mission Operations Center, which is what we're doing for IXPE, but we can also do the Science Operations Center like we do for MAVEN, which is a Mars orbiter science mission. We've got an international program that where we built the satellite, and we're actually the backup mission operations center for. So there's a variety of things, and in fact, most of us have multiple certifications for multiple programs, and we share our time or parcel it out according to whatever the programs need, and that's part of the reason why we can be so nimble, adjusting to and commanding on one vehicle, 1 hour, and then the next hour you're taking telemetry or analyzing data and doing all kinds of stuff all the way through the week.
And do you have a sense of how many things that LASP is controlling right now from our mock?
I see, what's it, 9 programs that we currently have?
Yeah, it depends on if you include CubeSats, and then it also depends on if you include each individual instrument on the MMS program. So yeah, it's a lot.
And do you have a sense of how many things that LASP is controlling right now from our mock?
Yeah, it depends on if you include CubeSats, and then it also depends on if you include each individual instrument on the MMS program. So yeah, it's a lot. depending on how you do that math, it gets above 100 really fast.
Wow. All from our little operations center.
That's right.
So a question about chemical thrusters versus an ion engine for reboost. What does IXPE have?
So I'll take that one. IXPE doesn't have any thrusters on board. So the orbit that we're in is the one that we will be in until drag from the atmosphere pulls us down. So we're at 600 kilometers. Basically, that's our sort of average height of our atmosphere. And depending on how energetic the sun is over the course of the next decade plus, it'll be about 18 plus years before we there's enough drag to pull the spacecraft in.
Excellent. And then somebody in the audience would like to know, how did everyone get into mission operations? What interested you about this, and how'd you apply?
Ooh, I like it. Let's ask the students first, and then we'll kind of go to the professionals and finish out. I think that's a great question to end on, so everybody can have something to say. So let's go with Luca first.
So I actually knew about LASP before I came to CU Boulder, and I knew that CU, one of the biggest draws about CU for me was the fact that its aerospace program was so, had so many ties to NASA and got so much funding from NASA. And so when LASP applications opened, my freshman year was actually when I applied. And I saw you get this opportunity to like work with flight controllers, to work in flight operations as a student. And I was like, I'm gonna apply to that. I wanna apply to that. And so I applied winter of my freshman year. And I actually got to train over COVID summer, which was a lot of fun. But but I've always been interested in, you know, space flight. And so I think for me, it was just coming to CU, just knowing that this was already an option.
Annika.
I was a big space nerd in high school. I went to high school in Boulder, and I was in an astronomy class, and we ended up taking a tour of LASP. I saw the mission operations room, and I saw that there was like student jobs for like basically the CC position. And then I forgot all about that, went to art school. Somehow one day ended back at CU Boulder and saw a flyer for the position. I was like, oh my gosh, this was that job. Got super attached to it. I actually applied twice. So I also trained with Luca during COVID summer and ended up getting the job that way.
I'm going to go with Allie. How'd you end up here?
Yeah, I was also a student for a few years before I became a professional. I saw the job ad just in the computer science department, and I've always loved space because both of my parents worked with satellites. So I kind of got to tour the facility, and the best thing that appealed to me was that the software engineers get to work directly with all of the operators. So all of my customers are right in-house, and I get to go bang on their doors and see what they need. And that's the best part of being a software engineer at LASP.
And we get to ask you a ton of questions all the time.
We blow up Allie's Slack every day.
Yeah, it's fun though, because I kind of get to be an operator sometimes too.
Stephanie.
So I actually started out as an ACS engineer at Northrop Grumman back when it was still orbital sciences. And I don't know, it wasn't really fitting well, but I really liked working. I worked on some geo spacecraft and I worked some launches and I really liked that. And I don't know, I think there was like one overnight shift to help. I was monitoring some other dying satellite as an ACS engineer, and I was working with another guy, a flight director and mission ops, and eventually, you know, they were looking for people to work mission ops for this new program, OCO. And we had worked well together, and, you know, so they brought me on, and it's been a good fit. And then I worked that for a couple years and then came to LASP. So really liked it.
Casey.
So I didn't even really know about mission ops with a background in art, kind of like Annika, but she knew about mission ops. I didn't quite. Anyway, I made a career pivot from art into STEM, started studying astronomy at CU, and just got a random email to all of the astronomy APS astrophysical planetary science students that was a call to apply for the CC position, the command controller position at LASP. And I hadn't heard of LASP and I hadn't considered anything like that. And I just looked at the requirements and found that I met the requirements. And so I applied, and I was actually a CC in the summer of 2018 at LASP, but didn't make it through all the certification exams, mostly because I had never coded in my life. So I went back to school and learned how to code, and then came back, and now I'm a professional flight controller at LASP. So I heard about mission ops through like the grapevine, just being involved at CU and in a STEM degree, honestly.
And finally, Lee.
Helps if you have the mute button. So I started out in space operations back in 1987, and I've got a long career in the military. But how I came to LASP is I was working on a missile defense program, and my job was getting eliminated. And one of my coworkers happened to see the ad for LASP, and he thought it was a very good fit for me, given my background and everything. So I came and interviewed for it. And one of the things that really impressed me about the organization was I asked at my interview, why do people leave? And the answer that I was given was retirement, which really appealed to me because, you know, it's hard to find stability in this industry. You have programs that come and go. You've got funding issues that always happen. And most companies try to keep their talent and move them to other places, but very few of them actually manage to keep their talent for a long time. And the largest reason is work environment and coworkers and other kinds of things. The other thing that really impressed me was this was the only place that I had ever seen that actually trained undergraduate students to be mission operators. There's lots of different educational institutions that do various kinds of engineering things, building instruments, doing stuff with CubeSats and everything. LASP is the only place that I've ever found, and I've not found any in the world, that actually trains mission operators at the undergraduate level. So it's a really extraordinary opportunity. We're constantly training new students every year. They bring in such great ideas, and they keep you sharp in the process. And so as a result of that, I just found a niche here that I just absolutely love. So I have been so impressed with folks like Allie and Casey, in many respects, without having any kind of background in STEM, any kind of background in space operations or space anything, just looking at it and saying, I want to do that, and then going and getting the training, and then just to get the foot in the door, and then we train them on everything else that they need to know. So it's been an extraordinary event for me, and I'm very happy to be a part of it.
All right, Terry, I think there you go.
Fabulous. Thank you everyone so much for joining us tonight. We'll be resuming the lecture series when the school year starts again in the fall. And meanwhile, may the 4th be with you.
May the 4th be with you, everyone.